If I said I was investing in Africa because of how fast the population is growing, the technological changes that are occurring, no one would bat an eye. In fact, some people would say that that's smart. If I said I was investing in
Right.
Latin America for the same reason, people
Mm,
would say that's brilliant. That makes a ton of
wow.
sense. There's so much opportunity. But the moment I say I'm investing in underrepresented minority founders in the United States, right? 100 million plus population, the same population as Japan or Mexico, right? Who round out the top 10. All of a sudden now that's charity.
Welcome to The Value of One, the Power of All, a podcast created by the Ron Brown Scholar Program. Since 1996, this organization has been investing in the next generation of African American leaders. And this podcast highlights the stories of the scholars, alumni, staff, and friends that make this program special. Hey y'all, this is Ray Pryor, 2015 Ron Brown Scholar. And in this episode, you're going to tune into a conversation I had with Ethan Monreal-Jackson. He's a Ron Brown Scholar from the class of 2008 and is currently the founder of Newtype Ventures, a venture capital firm that invests in seed stage tech companies that are led by underrepresented minority founders. Prior to getting into VC, he worked for a fintech startup, credit card company, a management consulting firm, and graduated from Wharton. And Ethan has spent a lot of his career as a founder and as a capital manager grappling with and fighting against the stark wealth inequality that exists in the United States. But the origins of what drives Ethan started much earlier, particularly during his childhood growing up in North Texas. Despite Dallas being his hometown, if you know Ethan or have even just seen a picture of him, there's a good chance he's rocking some San Antonio Spurs gear. So from one basketball fan to another, I kicked off our conversation by asking him, how does a kid born and raised in Dallas, growing up in Dirk's prime, end up being such a loud, unapologetic Spurs fan?
That is a great question. And born and raised in Dallas, you are correct. That being said, my mom is from San Antonio. And so if you have any San Antonio blood in you, any roots, you ride or die with the black and silver, right? So I didn't have a choice. My son, he doesn't have a choice. And what's even worse is his name is Maverick. My wife picked that name, and she picked it not because of the team. She actually doesn't follow basketball. She follows the Spurs because I'm a Spurs fan, but she doesn't follow basketball. She picked it because she thought that was a great name for him and who he would be. And then I had to explain to her, well, I'm from Dallas. I'm a Spurs fan. Do you know how this will come across? And she was very clear that she didn't care. And so I'm a diehard Spurs fan. I'm very happy that my son is named Maverick because he very much lives up to it. But I always have a lot of love and respect for the Mavericks. That being said, I'm a long-suffering Cowboys, Rangers, and Stars fan. So I rep the rest of DFW every chance I get.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And I think I understand it now if it's loyalty from your mom. So, man, we know where you are right now. You're the founder and general partner of Newtype Ventures, and you're investing in minority founders. And congratulations to all of the success you've had to date and success that you'll have in the future. But we know that there's a lot that led to this version of you. And sometimes if we just read the milestones and the headlines, they don't always do it justice. And so if you would, can you take us back to the beginning of Ethan, wherever you'd like that story to begin, and then we'll work our way back to the present. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, we'll start at the beginning. I don't know what headlines there are about me. I don't think anyone's writing about me.
They're all good ones, all good ones.
One of these days that will change. I don't know if anyone's writing about me right now, but
This will be the first one. This will be it.
Good.
Yeah.
It started in Dallas. I was born to a Mexican mom, a black father, and I was fortunate to have the mom that I had because she ended up raising me and two of my brothers by herself. So from a very early age, my father left us, and my mom had to be both parents. She raised me in Dallas. And so that's where it starts. And it's important because I can tell you with all sincerity that I wouldn't be here without her. That the sacrifices she made, the things she did. Now that I'm a parent, I still don't fully understand all the things she had to go through to get me to this position. So it starts there. But I was fortunate to be born in Dallas, born to her. And we grew up in really difficult circumstances. We grew up low income, obviously single parent, and it was difficult. It was very, very difficult to navigate the world when you don't have those types of resources, to go through some of the things we went through, to deal with some of the problems that we had to deal with. I won't get into details, but I had a traumatic childhood,
Yeah.
and I'm comfortable now saying that in public and to other people. But it was very hard for a long time to say that out loud. But I went through a lot of abuse. I went through a lot of trauma, and if it weren't for my mom being there and being the rock and having her be my support, I just wouldn't have made it. Right? None of us would have made it. We needed each other. Right? And so I say all this because I used to think it was a weakness. I used to think it was something to be ashamed of, some of the things I went through, but I realized that it's definitely shaped me, and it shaped how I approach things to life. It shaped my career even, because I really do believe that if others hadn't taken chances on me, if others hadn't supported me, my mom, my brothers, if they hadn't seen the value in us as human beings, then I wouldn't even be in this position. And a lot of what I'm trying to do is get other people to invest in people, right? To invest in folks who are underrepresented, who are overlooked, who are underinvested, who are undersupported. That's why it starts there. And so grew up in
Yeah.
Dallas, and then eventually I was fortunate. I was able to get into a great school, and from there things kind of just took off at that point. But it was hard up to that point.
Yeah. I think your story resonates with a lot of us of what we had to overcome. A lot of what you've done since then, as you said, is about investing in others in the way that people invested in you. And I think a lot of us as scholars view the Ron Brown as one of the early and really important key investments. And so I'm curious to hear when you're going off to Penn, what was your experience like? Because I think a lot of times people meet scholars, and we even in as seniors in high school have gone through a lot, but have learned the skill and the as a product of the hustle and the grind to present well and to engage with people well. And people get the impression that Ethan would thrive in any environment that he goes into, but some of those environments can be traumatic and challenging in a different way. So I'm curious if you can dive into your undergrad experience a little bit. What was that like for you?
Yeah, that's easy. It was awful. I hated it. I hated
Yeah,
Penn. Philly is a rough city, and once they find out
yeah,
you're from Dallas, it gets even rougher. So
absolutely.
I absolutely hated my experience, and even in retrospect, I hated it. I'm just going to be honest with people. I think sometimes we try to paint a positive picture or rationalize things, and the reality is that I absolutely hated it. I hated it for many reasons. I hated it because it was a culture shock. It was a culture shock coming from Dallas, from Texas to Philadelphia. Frankly, it was a culture shock being around people who had completely different backgrounds from me, who had stable homes, who had two parents, who grew up in wealth, and then to be in that group, in that milieu, it was really, really difficult to get to frankly to fit in. And on top of that, I'm mixed. I'm half black, half Mexican, and I really became aware of that dichotomy, that mix, frankly, at in Philadelphia, right?
Mm,
Some folks, some of our own folks, some black folks thought I wasn't black enough. Some Hispanic folks thought I wasn't Hispanic enough. And I'm not going to pretend that I didn't go through racism in Texas, of course, but people don't realize Dallas is one of the most diverse cities on the planet. Everyone talks about Houston being diverse, and rightfully so, but Dallas's statistics are right up there. Seeing a mixed black Mexican kid, mixed Asian Hispanic, black and Hispanic, black Asian, what have you, that's common out here. When I went to Philadelphia, it's like there was a black part of town, there's a Mexican part of town, there's an Italian part of town, and these parts of towns, they don't mix.
right.
And that's where I really became aware of that type of segregation, particularly in the Northeast. And so you have the adjustment to Penn's culture, you have the adjustment to Philadelphia's culture, you have the adjustment to being away from my family when we've been a unit the entire time. it was a miserable experience. And I'm glad I had the scholarship because I remember my first year, I didn't go to any classes. I just stayed in my dorm and played video games and wandered around the city. I just didn't want to be part of Penn. And I got decent grades, but obviously I didn't get the grades that I wanted. And I'll never forget my mom saying, We didn't go through these sacrifices. You didn't do all this stuff just so you could throw away this opportunity. And both Mr. Mallory and Miss Evans were very real about that. Freshman year is a really difficult year on Ron Brown scholars. I wasn't the only one going through it. It's an adjustment for all of us. No matter how good we are, no matter how much we thrived, it's an adjustment. And they were very helpful in just counseling me through that and saying, these feelings that you have, these issues that you're having, some of these mental health issues, some of these things with which you're dealing, it's normal. It's just normal. And you need to be able to, you'll be able to persist. We're here for you, right? But it was an incredibly difficult time for me. And there was one professor in particular, Professor Max Apple. He was my English professor. I took a bunch of writing seminars throughout my time at Penn, and I kid you not, if it weren't for him, I wouldn't have stayed. I don't think I would have made it through college because he saw my talent, he saw my value, and frankly, writing was a refuge. It was an opportunity for me to write about things I'd been through, my feelings, what I was experiencing, and it was a very pure environment. And I don't think I could have gotten through my time at Penn, my time at Wharton as a Wharton student, if I didn't have that outlet of creativity, that outlet of writing, so that I could put my feelings to paper, if you will, my experiences. So
Yeah.
all those different things are what I think of when I think back on my time at Penn.
Yeah. It is both a sad reality and like you said, a common one that a lot of people experience, a lot of scholars experience. I can imagine coming from such a diverse place like Dallas and getting thrust into a Wharton classroom. And on the outside, people will perceive Ethan as a very high achieving and driven person, even now, as somebody who has an extreme strong sense of self. Um, but that came at a cost. It sounds like came at a cost of living on the margins and of between different communities that you were a part of. Um, I'm wondering. I mean, you're going all the way up to Philly, having all these hard experiences. Was there any part of you that said you were going to throw in the towel and come home?
Yes, often. I often thought about dropping out. I won't get
Mm,
into the details, but my mom went through a particular health situation, and I remember thinking about dropping out to take care of her, to help her out. And I'll never forget, I was just at my wits end. I didn't think I could handle it. And Mr. Malley, particularly Miss Evans, they had experience with these issues and were
mm,
talking me through it and telling me that things, maybe they weren't going to get better, but you could get through it and that you could
mm,
figure it out and that you have this family. And so there were many times I wanted to quit Penn, frankly. And the irony was, every year at Penn, my GPA got better. Every year at Penn, I got more involved in things, but internally, I was dealing with these financial issues. I was dealing with personal issues. Part of the reason why I went to Penn was of the schools that I got into. I got into Penn, I got into Princeton, I got into a lot of other great schools. They were literally writing me a check, a stipend, so that I could afford to attend. It wasn't even just that they were covering my room and board. They were literally cutting me a check so that I could attend, right? And oftentimes I thought to myself, why am I going through this? I'm not happy. But then I thought, look, I'm literally getting paid to go to school, right? And then I have the Ron Brown scholarship support as well. And you, it seems really unfair in retrospect to make a college student have to figure this out, right? I feel like I have a debt, an obligation to make good on the investment that the scholarship has put into me, that the school has put into me. But at the same time, if I'm being honest with you, Ray, like, I didn't want to be there.
mm,
There's I'm a big fan of anime, and there's a show called Neon Genesis Evangelion, and the protagonist, one of the central dilemmas is that he is particularly suited for what he's doing, but he doesn't want to do it, right? And everyone's invested in him. Literally, the government's invested in him to do what he's doing, but that's not what he wants to do. And it's one of the central dilemmas in the show. Does he live up to their expectations? Does he perform the tasks that have been set before him? Does he accomplish the goals that they've given him, or does he follow his own path? Does he follow his feelings, his desires? And for me, that's often been the central dilemma that I face. How much do I want to deal with this nonsense? How much do I want to try to grind and get through it and grin and bear it? And how much do I want to be honest with how I'm feeling? And I think just as folks of color, we're often having to deal with that. We're often having to make those trade-offs. And I don't know what the answer is, but I felt it acutely at Penn, and I felt it ever since, to be honest with you. But that was the first time where I realized I'm having to make this decision between what I want and what people have put into me and what they expect of me.
I think that's a dilemma I've gone through myself and still going through myself. And it reminds me of a stat that came out a couple of years ago. It kind of became very popular about how the wealth of white high school dropouts is greater than the wealth of black college graduates. And a lot of people don't really understand why that's the case. And I think you have highlighted, not that you highlighted, the money aspect of it, but you highlighted so much of the burdens, and you use the word debt and obligations that you going through the exact same things that your white classmates and Warren going through. There's so many things that you have to carry in addition to the performance that you're trying to have. And
And it's not just in college, by the way. So when I
oh yeah,
graduated, I'm the oldest. So when I graduated, I got a high-paying job at the Boston Consulting Group as a management consultant. And the first thing I did was move home so that I could save money on rent, because I was paying for two of my brothers to go to college. And so it wasn't even that I just had the pressure of getting through college. I was making more money than my mom was when I graduated. I now had the pressure to be the breadwinner.
right,
And that isn't uncommon among Ron Brown scholars. It's not uncommon among folks of color that you graduate and all of a sudden you're thrust into a situation where now you are the breadwinner for your family, right? And so it's all these things that add to the pressures, add to the burdens, add to the debts that you have to take on, not just in college, but in your career, at the beginning of your career, maybe throughout it. You are used to having to carry not just your load, but others' loads as well.
yeah. Take me to BCG. You do well in Wharton despite all of those challenges. Are able to come home and work in a high paying role in consulting. Did it feel different than being in the Wharton classroom in terms of the internal struggles you were going through, or was it more of the same?
It was more of the same, and that was the problem. I thought
Yeah,
when I graduated, hey, I'm done with this. I don't have to deal with this nonsense. So the funny story is that yes, I joined BCG in the Dallas location after college, and 3 months into the job, I quit. And I quit because I was miserable. I'll never forget the day I decided to quit. I had been up all night working on some stupid assignment for one of the the case partners, and I had noticed that someone else on my team had been up all night, and she had noticed I had been up all night, and so we were talking in the morning at the client's office, and she said, "You were up all night." And I said, "Yeah, I was working. I saw you were up all night on Microsoft Communicator. That was the old school way of working. Now everybody uses Slack, and rightfully so." And I said, "I saw you were up all night." And I was asking, I asked her, "What did you do?" And she said, "I was crying." And I was like, "What?" I was crying. I didn't want to come into work. And then the other consultant in the room at the time, he said, "As soon as I get my green card, I'm leaving this job." And that's what made it click for me, that it doesn't get better. That these folks have been here much longer than I have, and they hate it and they're miserable. And I'm like, why am I miserable? And so that's what I was telling you earlier, Ray, this dilemma. I said, for how much longer am I going to be miserable? Because I think that I have to go through this,
right.
take care of my family, to do this, to do that. And let me tell you something. If I thought I couldn't take care of my family without BCG, I wouldn't have quit. But I knew that I could figure it out. And so I said, I can't do this anymore. And I quit. And to give BCG credit, they accepted the decision. They gave me a great salary, several months to figure out what it is I wanted to do. And again, the power of the Ron Brown Scholarship Program. Will Chichester of another RBS of a earlier year, he found out that I was leaving. And he reached out and said, "Hey, Ethan, I know you. I know how you think. I know who you are. I think you'd be a great fit for Capital One." And I said, "I don't want to work for Capital One. I don't want to work there. Right? I didn't go through all this hustle to end up there." And he said, "No, no, 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 no. You don't understand. This fits you. You're quantitative. You're analytical. That's what they do all day." And I said, "Okay, okay, okay. Like, let me think about it." And obviously, I went through the interview process. He shepherded me through it, and I got the job. And that, I consider Capital One my true alma mater. I learned so many things there that I use to this day, building underwriting models, doing subprime credit risk, doing strategy for the executive team, that to this day, I still use those frameworks, those techniques. I still think that way. And I'm so thankful for Will, because if he hadn't reached out, if he hadn't convinced me, persuaded me, he wined and dined me in Dallas. He took me to a Dallas Mavericks game, even though I'm a Spurs fan. Took me to Perry's Steakhouse. I mean, he did everything he could, the full court press, to get me to go there. And I'm so thankful he did, because that job led to my job in fintech, my job at San Francisco. Because a lot of the stuff I learned there, I had to apply immediately when I moved to San Francisco to work for the buy now, pay later startup firm. And so I actually talked to him a few months ago. I said, "Will, you don't know how much you changed my life." And again, that's the power of the program. If he hadn't reached out, if he didn't know what I was going through, my life would be very different right now. I probably wouldn't be in front of you in this capacity. And so again, it's that dilemma. I had to be true to what I was feeling. And because I knew I had the support, because I knew I could figure things out, I made that decision to quit. And so I'm very proud. I always tell people quitting's underrated. You should quit a lot of
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
right? Because you need to figure out what it is that really calls you, that really gets you going, that motivates you, that even in the toughest times, you still want to get it done. Too many people grind and persist in things that aren't going to lead them anywhere they want to be.
All right.
And I choose not to live my life by default. I choose to take action, to take control. And that was an incredibly important decision in my life, quitting BCG that early.
Yeah. Even just threading the needle of all the checkpoints we've had so far in your story, Penn being a very, very hard experience, and Mr. Mallory and Mrs. Evans being right there to say, even if it doesn't get better, you can get through it. BCG being so bad that you decide to call it, and Will is right there to support you in figuring out your next step and kind of ushers you at Capital One. And that is so RBS in nature, because Will even did a version of that for me when I was figuring out where I wanted to go to school. The moment I touched down in Charlottesville to visit the University of Virginia, obviously the office being there, they open up their arms and welcome me as I'm figuring out what I want to do. But he makes a huge effort to take me around town and help me think through my next path. And like you said, he's an amazing recruiter, and he definitely deserves some sort of award for that. I appreciate the Wills and the Ethans, and I think that's just a testament to our program, that even though we're able to achieve a lot of the success, none of it's possible. Like you said about your mom and your siblings, none of it's possible if all of us aren't all the way in. That was powerful to hear. So now we're now your Capital One is a foundational experience for you as a professional. Tell me about how you got to Affirm, since I know Affirm is obviously a company that I'm sure a lot of people have at least come across now, and buy now pay later is come on the scene in prominence in a very strong way. How did that connection into fintech happen from Capital One?
So I had been thinking about getting into tech. I had interned at Google the summer before my senior year at Penn. I had a return offer. Obviously, I turned it down to go to BCG, but I wanted to get into tech. And specifically, if we go back even further, when I was trying to make my decision of where to go to school, I had grown up poor, and I thought, look, I can study engineering. Basically, every place I got into, every school was for engineering. The exception was Penn. I got into Wharton. And what made me pick Wharton was that I had been on the receiving end of money, right? Of how money controls everything. It's like when you don't have money, it's everything. And I thought, look, the way you gain control in life, the way you gain power is through money. And so
Right.
I need to understand how that works. But then the funny thing happened. when I get to Penn, the Great Recession is in full swing.
Right.
And you're seeing all these titans, masters of the universe, if you will, struggling, right? They don't know what's happened. They've gotten them, they've brought the world to its knees doing just in retrospect and in prospect, just really dumb things. And I thought, look,
Right.
these folks don't know what they're doing. These folks are fools. And at the same time, when I interned at Google, I had one of the greatest summers of my life. I mean, being in the Bay Area, being exposed to tech, seeing all the possibilities, I thought, whoa, this is the future. Tech is the future.
Right.
So I had that in my mind the entire time from that summer. In fact, frankly, I think I would have taken the job at Google if it weren't in finance. They wanted me to go back to the finance team. I said, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do
Mm.
something else. But I had it in my mind to get back into the Bay Area, to get back into tech. And so after about 3.5 years at Capital One, I started applying for jobs in the Bay Area. I knew that I wanted to get out there, to the point that I actually told folks at Capital One, this was my way of burning the boats, burning the bridges. I said, look, I'm moving to the Bay Area. I don't care if I get promoted. I don't care what happens here from here on out. I'm going to do a great job, but I'm going to tech. And I let everybody know I spoke it into existence. Well, doing that, uh, ironically, the first credit hire at a firm, he was a former Capital One employee. He was their first credit hire. Prior to that, they had no one with credit experience at a firm, and you could tell with some of the dumb decisions they were making. And he heard through the grapevine that I was trying to get out to the Bay Area. So
Yeah.
I timed it in a way that I could do an interview with DoorDash, with Lyft, with other startups, and a firm at the same time by heading out to San Francisco that week. And so I flew out to San Francisco, had a bunch of interviews, and a firm, it made the most sense to join because not only could I learn tech, but I already had a skill that was valuable, my credit skills. And in
Right.
fact, kid you not, in the interview, the hiring manager, he said, look, so I did 8 hours of interviews with like no lunch. And we're doing math problems, we're doing product problems, we're doing strategy problems. And I go through that gauntlet. And at the end of the interview, the hiring manager says, hey, we think you're great, but do you know how to code in Python? And I said, well, no, I've coded in SAS and SQL, but I don't know how to code in Python. He said, well, that's a problem because we can't give you the job if you don't know how to code in Python. And I said, listen,
Mm.
man, I can learn how to code in Python faster than you can find someone with my credit skills. He said, okay, all right. And then next day I found out I get the job. So I quit. I took a month off at Capital One and spent that time learning how to code in Python. And the first day I get there at a firm, guess what I have to do? I have to write a script in Python to project our loss. And so that was the gauntlet that I went through to get out there, because I knew that whatever I was going to do, again, us being folks of color, we're always covering our downside. I knew I had to have a skill that was bankable from day one. Those were my
Right.
credit skills from Capital One, but I also knew I had to grow, and I had to learn tech, and I had to learn how to code, and so I taught myself, and the rest is history.
Yeah. I'm imagining you as you're sitting in Capital One thinking about, watching during the recession, as you said, the finance world kind of crumble, and figuring out how you're going to make the transition to the Bay Area. That there's kind of barrier upon barrier that you're thinking about. One is, I just imagine that week of interviewing with multiple startups, those 8-hour interview days is intense. And then also thinking about your family back home, I'm sure there's some calculus in that. And then you pass everything with flying colors and run into this barrier of needing to teach yourself how to code. Was there any point where you were like, I don't know if I can pivot into tech. I don't know if this is going to work. Maybe you thought it was worth it, but was there any part of you that was like, I don't know how I'm going to pull this off?
All the time I thought, I have no idea what I'm doing. Seriously, I actually, my girlfriend and I broke up, and I'm quitting my job. I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm making some serious decisions here,
Yeah.
and there are significant repercussions, and I don't know what I'm doing. And the entire time I thought, I'm an idiot. for doing this. And actually, when I spent that week interviewing, I remember I called my mom and I said, I don't know if I could do this. Nobody looks like me. San
Mm-hmm.
Francisco is primarily white, and there's a strong representation of Asian minorities, but it is overwhelmingly white. And I called my mom and I said, I don't see any folks who look like me, and the folks who do look like me are in dire situations. They're usually homeless. And I said, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if I could make it out here, just because this isn't the place for me. And my mom said, if everyone felt that way, nothing would change. There was no come back home. You can come back to your nice job, your girlfriend, your home, all that. It was like, look, if that's how you feel, nothing's going to change. And so that made it very clear to me that I had to figure something out. And so the entire time I felt I don't know what I'm doing. And it got even worse. That first week I was at a firm, they fired someone in front of me. And people don't realize this, that a firm is a much different culture. Back when I started, it was a pretty ruthless culture. And that all hands, the the manager who fired that employee basically just dogged him the entire time. And I thought, man, I need to get my act together, because if I don't make it, they're going to fire me, and then they're going to gloat about it at the next all hands. And so I said to myself, I got to figure something out here. I have to make it. I have to make it worthwhile, right? I took a pay cut. I moved into a studio in the Tenderloin. The Tenderloin is the roughest part of San Francisco. I actually purposely wanted to live there because I wanted to be in a community that would need my help. And I couldn't even move into it for the first month and a half, because my neighbor, his radiator leaked fluid or something happened, and it went through my roof. And so there was sludge all over my 250 square foot studio. So I couldn't even live there. So I had to live in a hostel for a couple of weeks. And then the head of sales, or one of the sales folks at a firm, said, "Hey, you can stay with me." And I ended up staying with him for about a month. And so my first time in San Francisco in tech is living in a hostel, living with one of the employees. I don't know anybody. Nobody looks like me either. And I'm working crazy hours because I'm worried about getting fired, and I'm having to learn how to code in real time. I mean, it was a horrible set of circumstances. And I look back and think like, whoa, I figured it out. Like, that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah.
But at the time, you don't feel that way. At the time, you're like, I don't know if I'm going to get out of it. I don't know how this is going to end. And again, I love what I love about the program, the Ron Brown Scholarship, is that a lot of us have been through things. We have this reservoir that we can draw upon, and that's what I was trying to do. I was like, I've been through worse. I've been through much worse. I've been kicked out of our home. It's been foreclosed. My mom's car was repossessed. We went through some pretty horrific situations with my father, and for me to get through that, this is nothing, right? I have to put it in perspective, put it in context. This isn't anything I can't deal with, right? And that's what I'm constantly trying to draw upon. It's like, I've been through worse. I can deal with this.
Yeah. I've been through worse. I can deal with this. That line sits with me. And I want to continue on with the story of after Affirm and eventually getting to Newtype. But there's something that is a common theme in your story that I see in mine that I've been grappling with that I want to ask you about. You always having to put your present challenges in the context of what you've already been through, that comparatively, or maybe you think about the challenges that you go through at Wharton compared to what you may have seen some of your friends or family members back home going through. I think a lot of scholars have been through a lot, but a lot of us look at our own lives as being in a position of privilege. Once we've been able to go off and do these things, we'd rather be us than a lot of the people that we know. But that gets heavy, man. Always having to think about who has it worse or when you had it worse, rather than sitting in that moment of how hard this experience is. Even if you would have had a perfect childhood and perfect college experience, it sounds like the first month of San Francisco would have been rough for anybody to go through based on what you did. How do you make sense of that? Does that ever get to you sometime where you're just tired of having to think about how bad things could be in order to bring optimism and hope into what you're experiencing right now?
Absolutely. It's actually something I've thought about lately during this year in which I launched Newtype Ventures. When you draw on those experiences, you're drinking poisoned water. It's like
Yeah.
water with mercury. And it might quench your thirst and it might get you through the day, but over time
Right.
it's gonna kill you. I'm
Right.
serious. And it's something that I worry about a lot, that it's very heavy. I've been dealing, frankly, being a father has made me have to confront some of the traumas and some of the abuses that I went through as a child and throughout my adolescence. And sometimes I think using those experiences, while it helps get me through this short term difficulty, in the long term it weighs on me. It makes me relive that trauma. It makes my anxiety grow. And I've I've actually thought a lot lately about, I can't keep going to that well. It's going to kill me in the long
Mm,
run. It's not going to help me. And
right.
so you're right. On the one hand, it has helped in these situations, but it's a difficult thing. It's a dangerous thing. Ultimately, it's a poisonous thing.
Right.
And I feel like as a child, I had these abilities. I had these strengths that enabled me to weather some of the worst things that a human being can experience. But the things I had to do to myself, physically, emotionally, I can't keep doing. It's
Right.
going to ruin me. And so it's interesting as an adult, as a father, as a founder, as someone who is in my position, I'm trying to rediscover those strengths, but without using those types of weapons, if you will, right?
Mm,
It's like
yeah.
it's an undoing and unlearning process. Like that resolve that I had as a child, while that was a great thing, the what it took from me, I can't get back. And the resolve that I have as an adult, the resolve that I have as a father, as an employer, like I can't use those same weapons or tools anymore. They won't serve me. And I don't
Absolutely.
have that capacity. So I think it's a great question that you ask, and it's something that I see others who've been through. I'm going to be honest with you. When you've been through the types of traumas and abuses I've been through, you can almost sense when others have been through it too. You can see it in them,
Yeah.
and you can tell when people are using it, when it's weighing on them. And I think the pandemic has forced a lot of us who went through certain things to live with our thoughts, live with our emotions, our feelings in a way that we didn't have to before. You were always
Right.
moving, right? That's how I feel. I'm always like, you can't catch me. These thoughts, these feelings,
Yeah.
they can't catch me, until they did. And now, how do you deal with that? That, I think that's a continual question for all of us. How do we deal with it? And I don't have a
Absolutely.
good answer, but I'm trying to figure it out. I just know that the way in which I've dealt with it before won't work this time.
Right. And I think that's the game that even if you hustle your way to Penn, hustle your way through BCG and Capital One, the game of the toll that it'll take on you decades after, that's the game that you can only get from people who've been in it. You can't even really bootstrap your way to handling that well. You might be able to hustle your way to the achievements, but the sustainable well-being not based on poisoned water, like you said, that quenches your thirst but kills you over the long time. That's why I think this community is powerful, because only a few people really understand that, can speak your
Yeah.
language and really get what you're talking about when you say that.
To use a more benign example, it's like an athlete who's just relying on his athleticism,
Right.
or it's an athlete that she's great at what she does, but she's just so much faster, so much stronger than her competitors. But there comes a point where your body inevitably starts to fail, right? You're not going
Right.
to be as fast, you're not going to be as strong. What does that athlete do? Does she how does she compensate? How does he compensate? What do these people do, right? And the best athletes figure out how to compensate, how to leverage their mental game, how to leverage their psychology game. They figure something
Yeah.
out. But in our lives, the things that maybe we did to get through our experiences, to get through our troubles, our traumas, we have to figure out a different way at this point, because it's just not sustainable, right? And that's
Yep.
that's how I think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well said, man. Let's come back to a firm. Very you could tell me if this is an inappropriate word. Sounds like a pretty intense. It's probably an appropriate word. People getting chewed out, and
It was
fired and
hardcore. Hardcore
yeah,
is
hardcore. That's a good one. Yeah. How did we get from a firm, right? I assume at some point fintech is going well. You found that this is the space you want to be. And then I know you, after a firm, you decide, you know what, I want to, at some point, I want to do this. I want to start my own company. I want to be a founder. Tell me about how that transition happened, or when the light bulb hit on when you said, you know, this is great experience for now, but I think I know what my next thing is going to be.
That's a good question. I had to develop the confidence. So after a firm, I worked at Max Levchin. He's the founder of a firm, one of the PayPal co-founders, and he's the current CEO of a firm. I worked at his incubator, and while working there, one of his startups, they wanted me to join as a co-founder. Ultimately, I said no, but that gave me confidence that I do have something that I can bring. And frankly, going through the startup experience at a firm made me feel like, hey, I can hang with these folks. I can deal with this type of stress. I can deal with these types of problems, right? And so then
Right.
I ended up joining another startup that was even smaller, right? When I joined a firm, it was roughly 100 people, and then this startup was fewer than 10 people, and that was a whole experience in and of itself, right? And so after going through that incubator, after going through working at that other fintech startup, I realized, okay, what's the next step? The next step is to just be one or two people, which is founding your own thing. And I had enough, frankly, capital to do it. Right. I was fortunate. My now wife, I met her at a firm. She is currently the longest tenured employee at a firm. And with her support, with her blessing, I knew that I could frankly just stop working and taking a salary and take what savings we had and put it into our startup, right? And then on top of that, my business partner, my co-founder at the time, now business partner, he and I had met at Capital One. And so he had moved to the Bay Area before I did, worked as a product manager at Credit Karma. And we thought, look, together we can do this. Right. And so it was a combination of having the confidence that, and then on top of that, other folks had asked if I wanted to start a company with, right? And so I gained that confidence that I could take that leap. And on top of that, frankly, we have to talk about this. I had the financial ability to take that leap. That isn't talked about
Right.
enough. That if you want to be a founder and you want to do it the right way, I mean, it is financially difficult, right? You can't pay yourself market rate. You can't pay yourself what you're worth. Your startup could go under. You have to fundraise. It's really really difficult. And most people of color who could do this, there's no doubt they could do this. They
Right.
don't have the cushion, and they have too many responsibilities. By that point, I had paid my brother's college off, the debts that they owed. My mom was fine. I could do these things. If
Right.
I hadn't made a lot of money, if I hadn't done very well, and I made a lot of investments, that was key. I made a lot of investments that were paying off. I wouldn't have been able to do this,
Right.
right? And so that's what got me to that point where I then decided to launch my own startup. But then that's what got me to this point in investing, because when we launched our startup, it was a savings app called Zenny. We had a lot of user growth. We had a lot of a lot of things going on. I built the app myself, front end, back end. We had Plaid integration. I did that myself. And when we went to go fundraise, it was crickets. Nobody was interested.
Mm,
Nobody. And we got in front of Lightspeed through a combination of Mr. Mallory having his connection to Lightspeed and the
yeah.
fact that they had invested in a firm, and Max thought highly of me. They were willing to talk to us about an investment, but they were the only ones. Despite the fact that we were technical, we built something interesting and we had a bunch of users. And that experience stuck with me because I thought, look, I've done all the right things. I'm an Ivy League
Right.
grad, honors graduate. I worked at BCG. I've worked at Google. I worked at an early stage startup and was a star employee. And then on top of that, I worked at the Founders Incubator and had an opportunity to join as one of their as a co-founder of one of their startups. And I did these things that you expected of me. You all said if I did these things, if I jumped through these hoops, this is the reward at the end. And the reward at the end was no investment.
Mm,
And I thought if I went through all this and I fit all these things, imagine what other black and brown folks are going through, right? They're not getting a shot. right? Because they don't have the pedigree, they don't have the college education that you would want from them, they don't have the technical abilities that you want from them. Even when they do, it's not enough for them, right? And
Right.
so that's what made me think ultimately when I decided to go into investing that we need to right this wrong. This doesn't make any sense. And frankly, I don't need you to do it because I know I'm going to make a lot of money. I don't need you to do it out of charity. I don't need your help. I'd
Right.
rather be investing in these folks now because I know they're going to succeed. That's going to make me and my investors a lot of money. And then by the time you figure it out, well, they're going to be coming to me. They're not going to be going to you.
And the way you laid it out was powerful. Ivy League grad, BCG, Google, Capital One, a firm. Startups are calling left and right, wanting you to join. What I don't know what other box you could have checked. Maybe being born white. Maybe that would have gotten it. But it's still not enough, right? Like Ron Brown Scholar. The story seems as if you were being given opportunity, given investments, and then knocking it down each time. But when the ultimate door that we know is really the one that we need to bust down in order for you to change not just how you're going to take care of your mom and your brothers, but to take care of your family for generations. It sounds like nothing would have it would have been crickets, as you said, if not for Mr. Mallory, his connection at Lightspeed. I think your illustration of the reality of what it means to be a person of color who is dope and still has to deal with these barriers from 18 or from earlier than 18 all the way up into your adulthood. I think you laid it out in a way that clicked for me, even in a different way as someone who's going through their own version of that. And I know that's at the center of what you're doing with Newtype. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing with Newtype Ventures, and when was the time that you said, you know what, I'm identifying that this is really the need in this ecosystem is someone who's going to invest in the people like me. Can you walk us through that story of when you said, okay, now I'm going to do this?
Exactly. So I ended up doing an entrepreneurship in residence with a program with Cape Horn Center in Oakland. So I did that with them, and then my co-founder, he had gone to UT Austin. He wanted to go back to Texas. He wanted to go to Austin in particular, and I wanted to just go back to Texas. I felt that the Bay Area was increasingly weighing on me. The racism, the wealth disparities, inequalities. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't. And actually, another Ron Brown scholar, Jason, he told me that do your tour of duty in the Bay Area and then get out of there. And I felt I had done my tour of duty. I needed to get out of there.
And
So
do
we
your
moved to
tours.
Austin. Exactly. We moved to Austin.
Well,
And again, very difficult to fundraise. Actually, there was a firm in Austin that wanted to cut us a check on the spot. So they deserve credit. They know talent. But we made a cardinal sin. My co-founder and I, we couldn't agree on what direction we wanted to take our startup. So we had a really good hook. Our hook was that if you save money with us, we would enter you into a lottery for free. And so we got a bunch of people who wanted to save with us, and it was costly for us because they were winning cash prizes for saving with us. Now that's a thing. There are like 5 startups that do that. We
right.
were like one of 2 that were doing that in 2018 when we launched. And they've all raised a ton of money. We didn't. Go figure. And so when we got to Austin, we had a real talk about like, where do we want to take this startup? This is a nice gimmick. It gets people in the door, but what do we do? And he and I couldn't agree. So we parted on amicable terms. He's my business partner. He's one of my closest friends. He's after my wife and my family. Like he's probably the most important person in my life. And we parted on at least on this startup. And so I decided to get into investing because of what I told you earlier, because of the experience of how hard it was to fundraise.
Right.
That I wanted to fix this. And so I put out my feelers in Austin, and a family office reached out and said, "Hey, Ethan, we'd love for you to interview." And then ultimately they said, "Hey, we want you to join." And I was like, "Well, whoa. This isn't venture capital. I'm not interested in making rich white people richer,
Mm.
right? This isn't interesting." And they said, "No, you don't understand. We do make venture capital investments. We actually have a venture capital firm that we recently launched, and they're going to need your help. And we think it's great what you're trying to do." if you can prove you know what you're doing, we'll support you in investing in underrepresented founders. Because I told them at the interview, I'm like, I'm not trying to just invest in other well-funded founders and make you folks richer. I actually have a greater goal here. And they said, we get it and we'll support it. Just come and join us. And that's what I did. I joined them and I built their investments team. I was essentially their chief investment officer. And we did everything. We invested in real estate. We invested in venture, in debt, in public equities. And we built out liquidity forecasting. We built out portfolio construction. They're a much bigger team now since I've left. And we set that foundation and proved we knew what we were doing, that I knew what I was doing. And on top of that, I spent a lot of time with their venture capital firm that they had launched and helping them build their fund model, their financial diligence, all that sort of stuff. So I've been investing for 3 years, and I was investing as an angel alongside the family office. So it wasn't like I was investing their money. I was putting my own wealth into things.
Right.
And so that entire experience, in the midst of that, I launched what's called the syndicate. And a syndicate is straightforward. It's basically a membership where I bring deals to this membership. I say, hey, I found a great startup to invest in. Let me know if you're interested. Here's my work that I put in. Here's my deal memo. Read it. Tell me if you want to invest. This is the timeline. And we built a syndicate specifically to invest in underrepresented minority founders. It was called the Agave Fund. It wasn't a fund. It was a syndicate. And to be honest, I didn't pick the name, but I'm a much better brander than that. But anyways, that was the name. And we ended up syndicating almost $900,000 of investment. And I participated personally with my own money in each deal across 7 startups led by underrepresented minority founders. And after that, after about 2 years working at that family office, running this syndicate, we were getting interest from people saying, Ethan, it looks like you know what you're doing. When are you going to launch a fund? Right. Particularly after the death of, the murders of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd.
Yeah.
Folks were starting to recognize that there was not just inequity in the police, in the justice system, in the judicial system, but also in the financial system.
Right.
And some folks were like, hey, how serious are you about this? And I said, I'm very serious. I'm dead serious. I want to do this. And ultimately, what led me to that decision was I was thinking, again, this is the theme of, how do you balance what you want to do versus what you feel you have to do? And I thought, look, those who could do this won't do this, right?
Right.
You don't want to go out there and say, I'm investing in underrepresented founders. You don't want to look like you're an impact fund. And we are not an impact fund. We are doing this to drive returns.
Right.
You don't want to go out there and just take charity money, right? And that's not what we do. But that's the stigma around us focusing on these founders. And on the flip side, those who decide to do this can't do this. There are a lot of folks who are out here and they've raised funds, and frankly, we've seen their portfolios, we know their diligence. They're not great at what they do, right? And to be honest, most investors don't know what they're doing, right? And so I thought, look, not only can I do this, I want to do this. This is something I want to do. This is something I feel that I can give back. I had gone through an exit with a firm, and so now I'm wealthy. And I thought I can sit on my money and do nothing with it, or I can take my money and seed this fund. And because I've been on the other side, on the family office side, investing in funds, investing in different things, I already have these relationships. And again, it just felt like all these things had lined up. And we were fortunate that Bank of America was also interested in learning more about the fund. And ultimately, they became one of our investors. And so it took all these things. And that's what I was telling you before we got onto this podcast, that it requires a lot of luck, a lot of capital, a lot of connections to do these things. Chances, capital, and connections. Those are the 3 ingredients you need if you're going to launch a startup or a venture fund.
And be great too.
Yeah. On top of that, you have to be great.
Yeah.
Those are table stakes on top of being great, And so that's when I felt, look, if I don't do something, again, like what my mom said about the Bay Area, when I was like, I don't know if I want to move to San Francisco and work in tech. He's like, well, if you don't, who will? I felt like if I didn't do this and do this at the highest level possible, starting my own fund, specifically investing in tech seed stage startups led by underrepresented minority founders, who was going to do this the way that I thought this needed to be done?
You articulated an experience that I know a lot of other scholars who are leading organizations of various types have gone through over the last few years, is trying to make sense of this post 2020 weird, kind of super duper late, but I guess we'll appreciate it, racial reckoning that happened in our country, and you having to shake off the stigmas of, no, we're not an impact fund, as you said, and no, we're not like another firm that you may have saw online that invests in minority founders. We're not all the same, and we don't all do the same things. We're not searching for the same thing, and a lot of concern, both in the on the in the private market side as well as in the nonprofit sector, has been that eventually that's going to wane. Eventually, that's going to wear off. What looked like an outpouring of support in response to tragedy is eventually going to rebalance itself to the country that we all know. What has your experience been like since that time when somebody said, "Hey, I'm thinking about myself and our company, looking at the headlines of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. If you're serious about this, I want in." Has anything changed in the industry overall since then for you?
A lot has changed. A lot, unfortunately. Obviously, we're going through inflation that we haven't been through in over 4 decades,
Right.
right? And when you go through this, I mean, we know human nature. When you're in rough times, the average person is going to get insular. They're going to batten down the hatches,
Right.
right? So we're incredibly fortunate to have the investors we have. They're the real ones. They're day ones. But we've had people who said last year, "Hey, Ethan, I want to invest," and then this year, when we ask, they're nowhere to be found, right?
Mm.
And in fact, there was an incredible paper that was written earlier this year called "Racial Diversity in Private Capital Fundraising." It was written by Professors Johan Castle, Josh Lerner, and Emmanuel Yimfer, and they looked at uh, just that, the diversity of those who raise private capital. And what they found is that diverse managers, particularly managers who are Black or Hispanic, the capital they're able to raise is correlated with what they termed racial awareness. Basically, when significant racial events happen, like horrific events to our communities, all
Yeah.
of a sudden we're able to raise more capital. And then when the news cycle ends, our ability to raise capital drops, right? And that paper also had some other interesting insights, but that one in particular, we're experiencing where people
Right.
who claim they wanted to help, who claimed they were interested and believed in said they believed in my ability and my thesis, they're nowhere to be found, right? And
Yeah.
that's the sad truth. Now that being said, we've got some great investors. We've raised about half of our fund. We're in the midst of fundraising, but I'd be lying to you, Ray, if I said that the folks who said they wanted to help ended up helping. Some of them did, some of them did not, right? And that's the truth. And that's something that we uniquely face as folks of color, right? I mean, the stats are horrific. We are 30%, more than 30% of the US population, Blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans. And yet we get less than 3% of venture capital as founders, and we manage less than 2% of private capital funds. I mean, to put that in perspective, now, if you turned us into a country, we'd be one of the biggest countries on the planet. We'd
Right.
be top 11, top 12 in population, right? But when I say I'm investing in underrepresented minority founders, people think that's charity. If I said I was investing in Africa, because of how fast the population is growing, the technological changes that are occurring, no one would bat an eye. In fact, some people would say that that's smart. If I said I was investing in
Right.
Latin America for the same reason, people
Mm.
would say that's brilliant. That makes a ton of
Wow.
sense. There's so much opportunity. But the moment I say I'm investing in underrepresented minority founders in the United States, right? 100 million plus population, right? Probably the same population as Japan or Mexico, right? Who round out the top 10. All of a sudden now that's charity, right?
Wow.
It's just framing. And so I have to
Yeah.
tell people we are a force. If you got rid of us, the U.S. would be declining in population. GDP would be declining.
Right.
And frankly, we're going to be a majority minority nation. Texas already is a majority minority state. So is California. Eventually, that'll be the United States,
Right.
right? And so we tell people we're not appealing to your better angels. We're appealing to your wallet. That this is the future. The folks who look like you and me are the future. We're the next great founders. We're the next great business leaders. We're the next great politicians, right? We're the next great nonprofit executive directors. You name it, it's going to be us. This is the time to get in
Right.
because we're going to remember who was a day one and who's just anyone, right? We're going to
Yeah.
remember the difference.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that Ron Brown preaches all the time. That's what Ron Brown was for us, really, if you think about it, is they made an investment in us that a part of that is about undoing the racial injustice that exists in this country. And that's important to do. A part of that is that. But really why I was excited and kind of feel like I don't know if they made a mistake or overlooked something. I'm just blessed that they found my name and slid it into the room. Is these are going to be some of the most powerful people and most amazing people, and you know them at 18 years old, and that's
Exactly.
very, very different than meeting them at 38 years old or 58 years old when they're going to run for office or whatever the case may be. So what you're describing and what you're doing with Newtype is in a lot of ways very RBS in nature.
The Ron Brown Scholarship Program is making a bet. It's making an investment
Yeah.
in what society thinks is high risk, but what we know is not high risk. We know these folks are going to do well. We know we will succeed in some shape or form. We're doing the exact same thing. We're saying, look, folks have overlooked you. They've underinvested. We're making a bet that they're wrong and we're right, that you know what you're doing, that you will succeed, and we're going to be there to help you do it. It's the exact same principle. And I think a lot more folks need to understand that it's not just the donor dollars that matter, it's the investment dollars, right?
Right.
There are different ways to invest in folks of color and in our communities. And just as people are making investments in our students, we have to make investments in our business leaders and our politicians. We have to invest in our community holistically. And to your point, investing in a scholar is the same thing as investing in a founder. There really
Right.
is no different, right? You're
Right.
investing in that person and their potential. That's what we're doing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Value of One, The Power of All, a podcast created by the Ron Brown Scholar Program. If you want to hear more inspiring conversations like this one, don't forget to click subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. To learn more about the organization, check us out at ronbrown.org.